Hello, everybody, and welcome to this session where we're going to cover sales skills development for 2024. Thank you for joining us. I'm really excited to three great folks lined up to dig into a few topics today. I suspect we may have some spicy opinions, so I'm personally excited about that. First up, I would just like to introduce myself, your host for today, Stephanie White. I'm a revenue enablement leader currently with Enablement Reimagined. I'm in the camp of seller turned enabler, and I've been passionately working in this space for close to 20 years now. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Peter.
Hey folks, Peter Ostro with Forrester. Also a seller turned analyst about selling, coming to you from outside of Boston today, and looking forward to a rousing conversation here on the panel.
Very good. All right, Paul, Mr. North, hand it over to you to introduce yourself. Want to introduce yourself, Paul? All right. Well, while we work through that, we're going to do a quick pivot in real time, everybody. Steve, over to you.
Hey, thanks so much, Stephanie. I'm Steve Hallowell. I lead the professional services team here at HighSpot. We have the privilege of working with many of our customers on their training, how to build really effective training and drive effective skill development. So looking forward to this discussion here.
Excellent. Okay. And we are just working through a couple of technical challenges. So as soon as we have Paul on audio, we will hit a quick pause and allow him to introduce himself as well. All right. Perfect. So today we are going to talk about three key topics as we think about sales skill development. So tools of the trade, how to create cultures of continuous learning, and we are really going to dig in a little bit more into how to hold folks accountable and measure the impact of the learning that they're actually doing. We'll wrap it all up with some key takeaways and send you on your way, hopefully with some great tidbits that you can apply soon. All right, so let's dig into it. Oh, North, do we have you back on audio?
Indeed you do. I can hear everybody nice and clear now. Forgive me, sorry about that, technical challenges, but we've got the gremlins out of the way now.
Don't worry, they'll probably come back. Let's take a moment. Please introduce yourself to our wonderful audience.
Yes, indeed. My name is Paul Norford. I'm Vice President of Global Enablement and Chief Evangelist at a company called Ivanti. Most people do call me North, so feel free to call me that. And there's a whole backstory behind that. But you can hear that I am from London. So just very briefly, most parents, when you were growing up, put your name on the inside of your T-shirt. Mine didn't get the memo. So that's why it's on the outside of my T-shirt, Stephanie.
I mean, maybe I just need to pick that little trick up for myself also. Like just little... Should. Hi, my name is. Also, this is my shirt. Please, nobody steal it from me. Good little tidbit. Thank you, Paul. And I'm glad to have you back because actually this first question that I'm going to pose to you all, I would love to hear from you first if you're up for it. So the first thing we want to talk about is tools of the trade. So what are the most effective tools and or tech, you can take that however you want to, a lot of us work in tech, for sales skill development in your experience and opinion?
Who's that question to?
That would be you.
Wow. Okay. So that's a very big question. Thanks for the opener there. When it comes to, in my perspective, when it comes to skills and the best way to learn those skills, for me, I have to go back to when I was a kid. So if I think about the way that I learn, it's very much through visual and auditory. So I'm very much an audio-visual type learner. So one of the things that I love to do is watch video, but also listen back to them as well. So if I'm looking to build a skill, and it might be a skill of, I don't know, video editing, for example, if I watch it and listen to it, I'm able to comprehend what's going on. Then I have to go and practice it. And it's at that point that I'm kind of good to go. And when I talk about something like video editing, for example, it may well be, and I'm going to show my age a little bit, things like 1/4-inch tape, right? Where you physically get a piece of tape and you have a China graph pencil and you cut it and you then stick it back together once you've made the edit. Moving that into the digital world is very similar. So there are elements like that I think it's a way to make sure that people understand and they see what's going on, they hear what's going on, and then they've got an opportunity to then go and plug it in and actually try it to see if it works. And I think if you take those pillars and you plug them into whatever you're doing, let's now take sales and win rates, you've got to have a safe place to practice a lot of those things. You've got to have really good mentors and people that understand, that have carried the bag and walked the walk, a safe place for them to practice, and then a safe place for them to go and apply those skills. And the more you do these things, I have a phrase where if you do anything for 8 hours a day, you're going to get good at it. So if you then have a safe place to learn these skills, then go and apply them, it's at that point it starts to move from short-term memory into long-term muscle memory.
And it's so true, right? So many of us talk about, I'm an audio learner, I'm a visual learner, or I'm a hands-on learner. I think this is where, even Salesforce, for example, as you're talking, I'm thinking playing in the sandbox, right? This is why we have sandbox instances. This is why we want to have role play environments for folks to actually go away and apply. Love that. Okay, Peter, I would love to hand it over to you next and hear about the best tools from your perspective.
First, I'm going to give North some props for digging into the neurolinguistic programming space. I always wonder, is it half science and half total crock? Is it 60-40? Is it 70-40? Because it does matter. And I think that the point that you're making is, whether it's visual, kinesthetic or auditory, is we're speaking about not having a monolithic approach towards helping B2B revenue professionals learn. And what we often see is organizations that are trying to shift from sales inflictment to sales or revenue enablement. The inflictment piece is usually represented by the monolithic one-size-fits-all learning approach, which is, hey, we just completed this amazing learning path. I'd like all of you to stop selling right now. Oh, I know it's the last week of the quarter, but it's really, I'm super excited about this artifact. So could you please stop doing your job and pay attention to me right now? But the thing is, obviously the timing and the snark about, how it's delivered is one thing, but most importantly, you're talking about learning preferences. And anybody who has experience with the science of adult learning realizes people have different ways in which they communicate, audio, visual, kinesthetic, et cetera, as well as how they learn. Our research at Forrester consistently showcases how important, especially for earlier millennial and Gen Z learners, learning around other human beings is really the most preferred modality, whether it's on the job, collaborative learning, one-on-one with my manager or a coach. Classroom learning is actually still always number 4, 5, 6 on the list of usually about 16 options that we give to folks. The bottom of the list tends to be podcasts, gamifications, forcing me to listen in real time to a live webcast that I could do asynchronously just as easily. So I think paying attention to those is super important. And I know that the topic, Stephanie, is officially, it's about the tools to deliver those things. A fool with a tool is still a fool. And so we want to make sure that we focus as enablers first on delivering learning and development around the learner's best likelihood to absorb it. And then we'll probably get back to this with one of our subsequent round robins, doing so in the context of their work, as opposed to at the convenience of us who are the enablers.
Yeah. I'm so glad that got brought up, the generational differences, because I think we can all joke. I'm in the millennial camp. I'm an elder millennial, but it still counts. We all joke about the 5-second attention span. But here's the reality. In my most recent team, we actually had a mandatory GIF policy in our training decks. The reason why is because our average learners were in their mid-20s. And having a GIF that reinforced our why showed not just that our learners enjoyed the training more, and we'd often hear anecdotally and in our surveys that really helped drive the message home, but it really helped drive the engagement, and it helped just work it through and process it and link it bonus points if you can do it to something in pop culture for your gift, but really help link it in a way that matters most to your audience. Because yeah, Peter, you're right. It's not what we want to say. It's what they're going to hear, understand, and take away from that conversation or that session. I love that. Steve, over to you.
Yeah, North, I think your comments really resonated with me of the notion of, hey, I've got to see it. I've got to see what you want me to do. And then if I see it, I can replicate it. I have those examples of what good looks like. And how many of us have been to a sales kickoff where we're rolling out something brand new for the first time? It's never been field tested. There are no examples of what good looks like. And somebody's standing up on stage saying, go do this thing. But it's not really clear what it is yet. And I think the number of times that we roll things out way too early, and we do it with all the best of intentions because we're trying to move fast, we're trying to get things done, and we've got pressure from all levels to do that. But I like to tell people to wait till you have those examples. Do you have it's not the CEO, it's not the head of enablement, it's not the head of marketing, it's not the head of sales. It's, do you have a couple of folks from the field that you've captured on video doing the thing that you want people to do? And if you have that, and then, by the way, they probably have gotten some good feedback of your initial theory about what it looked like probably wasn't quite right. They're going to improve it. But if you have that, now you've got those examples that people can replicate. And then are those things easy to get to? Are they in a place that anybody's ever going to find them again or not? But that's a really powerful tool. I think that practice point is huge as well. And so often we just kind of skip over that. No seller that I've ever known wants to do something for the first time in front of a high stakes customer. It's just crazy, and yet we often don't have those practice opportunities baked in. And then of course the coaching piece that, all of us need some support, a little bit, the nudge to go jump in the pool and hold me accountable to doing it, but also the safe place and you got my back and help me get better at this new thing. And it's those things coming together that I find really leads to that sustainable skill development.
I think it's an interesting comment that you made too, to even plug in how we help folks practice. Because nobody wants to do it live for the first time. I think we've all been there in previous sales roles where we stumbled in public the first time we tried it. Let's not do that. But we can provide teams that help that practice. And there's some great tools out there, right? Where reps can actually role play, whether that's with an AI bot that you can use a certain persona, or whether that's even recording and sending it back through an LMS system or other. There's great opportunities for that practice. So I love that. So
the great advantage, Stephanie, the great advantage of those AI tools baked into your readiness environments is that it takes away the barrier of manager subjectivity, and it takes away the barrier of manager bandwidth. You can let just the AI machine be the entire jury. For my practice pitch, you can have it be one of 3 votes on the jury. You can give it half a vote on my jury. You can throw out the high and the low like Olympic judges, and it can just be one of them. And the flexibility that we have around these, if we get the coaching guidance and the role play guidance in play before we deploy the technology, it can be massive. Absolutely. We're starting to see that out there.
Peter, one of the things that I think I'm really excited about there is the ability to start to more realistically simulate a customer. We're seeing this out there. One of the hardest things to role play is a good discovery conversation, because it's really hard to do that in a way that isn't one-sided and awkward and kind of staged. And to have the AI be able to listen to our customer calls, know what questions our customers ask, know how they respond, and simulate that, I think that's a really exciting new development here.
Yeah, and at the moment, the tools still require a decent amount of administration to figure out what are all the different decision tree paths or chessboard paths that role play could go. Eventually, the machine learning capabilities of these AI tools, AI and ML are not the same, as we all know, will allow them to grow smarter over time and start to be able to better game out what could happen in those conversations.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I'd like to chime in as well. And one of the things that I've observed is that technology is moving at a rate of knots, right? If you think 10 years ago, we didn't even have the concept of AI or ML, right? Now we have it. We're living with it, and we're embracing that in the enablement world. If I think back to people like me, not you guys, because you're all phenomenal, but if I think about people like me, I still communicate and receive information in 3 distinct ways, right? So I'm either using voice, so I'm using tone, the words that I choose to use, and what my eyes observe. That hasn't changed for millennia. So if we're going to make sure that our teams are best skilled and best equipped to be the best that they can be. Because let's think about it, our salespeople are our greatest resource, right? We've got to be able to have not a proof of concept, but a proof of value about how these technologies plug into our enablement space, because our sellers are still going to work things out in those three fundamental ways. So I think there's an opportunity for us as enablers right at the bleeding edge of what we're doing in our world to bring these things in, ask our teams just to slow down. Let's create proofs of value. Then let's go plug those things in a safe environment for all of our sellers to learn and scale.
I love that. Okay. If we're talking about getting our sellers buy-in, it feels like the natural progression to talk about how do you create a culture of sellers wanting to learn, of continuously learning, because, you know, we all know that old adage, what got you here won't get you there. And sales is lightning fast, especially for those of us in B2B SaaS. And I think we can all feel that. Peter, I'm sure you've got a lot of data on this in terms of how quickly we need to adapt. How are you thinking about how you continue to foster culture where your sales teams not only want to pursue developing their skills, but also truly see the value in doing it and the what's in it for me? Steve, I'd love to start with you on this one, given your expertise professionally and personally.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. I think this is a fun one. I think there's some table stakes here of you've got to have the right talent. You've got to hire people who are curious, who want to learn, who are motivated to learn. I'm going to assume we all have that. Let's start that as the baseline. From there, we've got to make sure that the learning is truly delivering value back to the sellers. And too often I see learning, there's too much focus still on learning for the sake of knowledge versus learning for the sake of being able to do something that's going to make me better at my job. It's a subtle but very important shift. And I mean, I've been in situations countless times where, you know, the CEO of the company or the head of sales was saying, "Hey, Steve, our team doesn't know enough about the product. We got to go do product training." All right, that's knowledge. What is it that they're not doing? Where do they need to do something better so that I can focus that on something that's actually going to be useful for them versus stuffing their heads with a bunch of knowledge that actually doesn't help them perform better at the end of the day. So this next element is that alignment of, is the thing we're teaching really valuable, and does it lead to me being able to do something differently as a seller versus just know something? The third piece then is that when we get into that training, we've got to help sellers recognize how this is going to help me. I think job one of any training is to get the learner to say, I need this. This is relevant for me at a personal level. Just the same way when we go into a sales situation, if we lead with product, we start talking about product, we start talking about benefits before we identify pain, uncover challenges with the current state. We all know the problems with that approach, yet that's what we often do in our training. We're not taking the time to help the learner recognize where they might have a gap, whether that is, hey, here's some data that illustrates, you know, where there's an opportunity, whether that's I'm going to give you a task to do that turns out is more challenging than you thought it was. I think those are some of the most impactful moments I've seen in teaching, is when you start off, you're not trying to set anybody up for fail, but you're trying to say, hey, let's go try to do this. Let's go do this thing. Oh, that's hard. What do you know? Okay, great. Now there's a learning opportunity. But you've opened up their minds to saying, I have an opportunity to do something here and I want it, and now I'm engaged, versus it's something I'm pushing on you and I don't really see why this applies to me.
I like that. As you were talking, I was thinking about my daughter has science class. She's young, and they did one of these classic experiments, right? How do you get this volume into this shape? And how does that work? And it's exactly what you just described. Here, a second grade teacher said, okay, boys and girls, everybody give it a shot before the lesson even started. Knowing that you might get one person who figures it out with their intuition and some raw skills, but the vast majority of them are going to struggle. Then she teaches the lesson and then she says, okay, now let's try it again.
Yeah, I am thinking in that image of my first grader where it's, hey, it's cold outside, we should wear a jacket. the direct tell approach versus why don't you go stand outside for a little bit and tell me if it feels cold or warm. It's kind of the same concept at the end of the day.
Yeah. So I think it's interesting when we talk about fostering a culture of continuous learning, sometimes it's almost like if we go back to our 7 or 8-year-old selves, how would that person need to learn? And how can we incorporate that into our business classrooms that we have? Steve talked about, product training anecdotally there. Norf, given your background, helping salespeople understand product and helping them continue to learn how to sell the value. I'd love to hear your perspective, especially now in enablement and evangelism. How do you weave that in, and how do you keep fostering that thirst for knowledge?
Great question. For me, it's got to start with me, and the reason I say that is if I'm not walking my talk, then I can't authentically say this is kind of what you need to do. I've never carried a bag, right? But one of the things I like about sellers is that they say it exactly how it is. For me, when it comes, and for me and my team, when it comes to enabling our sellers, talking about speeds and feeds sends people to sleep. They can get speeds and feeds off a website. And the funny thing is that for some of our teams, that's their most comfortable place. Yeah, but I know about this stuff. Why can't I just go and talk about this product and that feature and that mega flop and that giga, whatever it is? But hang on, what does that mean for me if I'm the buyer, right? What you haven't done is plugged yourself into the biggest problem that I have. You're telling me about what's in your world. You're not articulating what's in my world. So our sellers now have the challenge of understanding what's going on in their customers' environments. If they understand that, they'll actually be talking a much higher level of conversation, talking about value and pain and challenges. And once they have that conceptualized and the customer agrees with them, it's at that point, then you start to talk about, well, what would good look like if that problem or that pain were to go away? Move it into the surgical world, right? When you go and see your GP or your dentist or whatever, your dentist doesn't just prescribe something and say, "Oh, nice to see you, Stephanie. Here's a script. Go fill that in and take the tablets or whatever." You'd kind of look at them and go, "Yeah, but you haven't listened to what challenge I've got," right? It's exactly the same principle in our sellers' world. So making sure that our sellers plug themselves in to the customer's greatest problem then allows them to go, well, actually, we need to be talking about our value. Your challenges equal our value that we bring to the table. Then that's where we get a solution. When it comes to learning, there's something practical that I tell all of my teams. So I block out an hour, possibly 2 hours every Friday for me to, I call it GYLO. And it stands for Get Your Learn On. And that 2 hours is blocked out, partly because it's ring fenced for me. Also, people can't put meetings in those times either. So I spend every Friday just reading through things to keep me sharp. It's back to I think it's the 7th habit of highly effective people sharpening the saw, right? And where we as enablers have to make sure that we stay sharp. If we don't, how are we expected to sharpen our teams? We can't, because we may well fall into the realm of being irrelevant. And that's one thing that our sellers do not need from the enablement organization. So very much that culture of continuous learning starts with me. It starts with the enablement team. We then get to farm out some of those really cool little things like just block out an hour and read this, or block out an hour and get involved in that. Speaking of get involved, making sure that our sellers are involved in whatever we create means that they're going to be brought in. If we teach them, they might learn how to do things. If we get them to teach their peers are going to listen more to them and remember more what they say than what potentially we could say and enable them. So driving that level of continuous learning, and Steve, you alluded to it earlier, is it's got to start with enablement. Once it starts with enablement, we then start to push the boundaries out a little bit more. And then we actually start to pull in some of our sellers to say, well, here's what we're doing. What is it you're doing? How can we get you to scale? How can we get you to teach your peers? And I think by doing that, that then begets other sellers doing exactly the same thing.
Norf, I just want to applaud that last point there, because I think it's so critical that, I've been in some situations where the enablement folks want to be the experts. I've had people on my teams that have done this, and it's all about them and they're front and center, versus how do we take as many of the voices from the group and make them the teacher? And when we allow that to happen and we celebrate that, and it's peers teaching peers versus teacher student, it totally changes that dynamic. I love that.
What you just referred to as magic, enablement magic. And that's exactly what happens when you get sellers excited and passionate about what they do, talking to their peers. And for me, I think once that happens, we get to sit back and say, our job as enablement is done for the day.
Or for the hour.
Oh, come on. Come on. You can do
Norf,
better than that.
I'll push back a little bit on something that you said, which is that a culture of learning and continuous lifelong learning begins with enablement. I'd say that a culture is a summation, it's a sum of the norms top down within an organization. So when you see someone from the leadership or executive team learning, you're going to be taking a powerful lesson from them, especially if they are directly in your line organizationally, org chart wise, right? So I published a blog on the Forrester's, it's in front of the firewall, on February 16th, a little bit earlier this year, called something like 32 to 36 courses is not revenue enablement. It was based on a 5+ year old trauma that I had with a customer, where they were like, oh, I know how to enable our team. We need 32 to 36 courses. They were being paid by the course, right? So we want to make sure that enablement is not distributing or publicizing or socializing learning for its own sake. Enablement must only be seen as a servant function, serving its customers. Its customers are the sellers and other customer-facing roles. So to me, the culture is not going to be defined by enablement. The culture can be amplified and socialized by enablement, but it starts at the top of an organization and works its way down. And I think that one of the ways in which we can get away from that 32 to 36 course mindset is to make sure that we are not just delivering how folks like to learn, which we discussed in our previous segment, but also when it's most appropriate for them to learn. We know that best of breed, high performing B2B sellers, as well as especially the millennial and Gen Z audiences, hold an organization super accountable when they're deciding whether or not to take a job or to stay around with a current job, based on a lot of important cultural factors. And the top of that list is, am I going to get personal and professional development out of this organization from day one? So they want it, but then you ask them to do it. Like, I don't have time to do this. So part of the problem with that is the context and the timing and the lack of convenience as to when we often provide the development. And I joked earlier about, hey, stop selling on the last day of the month and come take this course. The opposite of that is thinking about me, the seller, and the only thing that matters to me, if I'm any good as a seller, my deals right now. Nothing else matters to me except for my opportunities, my deals, my pipeline, my renewals, my up, my cross. And if you're going to deliver to me any kind of a learning artifact or experience that helps me right now with this deal, because I just changed some of the ones and zeros and boop, up pops a learning artifact that's going to help me right now with this deal, you are going to get my attention. So I think it's really a matter of us paying just as much attention to our internal customers and the right cadence and the right timing and the right messaging of what we want them to consume as our marketing friends do with our outside buyer customers, where we pay a lot of attention to the cadence of what they consume, how they do it, and their personal preferences.
And you hit the nail on the head there, actually, Peter, when you talked about what sort of learning and contextually, when does that learning happen? If you're trying to learn a brand new skill of something that takes quite a while to do, then that's something that you'll double down on, but you'll take your time learning that skill. What you just referred to was a secondary piece, which was just in time learning. I've got a deal, I've got a problem, I need to fix this now. Boom, we've got AI and ML that provides me with contextual learning just at the point of when I need it. Right, let me read through that or let me watch that. That then helps me close this deal or move this deal on to the next stage. So I think you're right. We as enablers need to focus on both of those elements to be able to serve up really good, high quality learning that our teams are going to consume. And I almost probably suggest that everyone has either got a YouTube account, Instagram account, TikTok account, maybe all three, because in your downtime, you'll be looking at these things because you find these things amusing. Why can't we take some of the elements, the quality, the delivery styles of what's in YouTube videos, for example, and have those plugged into our enablement as well, right? It's easy now to get high quality video gear that you can just plug in, but having that high quality content coupled with our enablement content as well, I see some areas are gapped. But why can't we take those elements and plug them into our enablement? Because as you both referred to, think about our millennial learners, think about Gen Z, think about Generation Alpha that's coming through as well. We've got to be able to cover all of those generations with whatever learning we're going to provide for people.
You know, and Peter, I like your idea of, hey, just in time is awesome. And when we can provide things that are bite-sized and contextually relevant, that's amazing. And for some of that deeper skill development, I do think that takes some focused time, some focused effort. It can't be done in the moment. You kind of need to step back and focus on it. You know, and you think about, I don't know, take the classic golf analogy of, you know, I'm trying to work on part of my golf swing. To have somebody in your ear at the moment when you're in a tournament, probably not the right time to be doing that. You probably need to go to the driving range and focus on something and have that dedicated time and space to do it. And so I think there's just a time and place for both there.
So I'm going to come in with one slightly different take. And I love how people have been debating. Peter, I'm coming after you on this one. I don't love top-down topic planning. When we think about millennials and Gen Zs and the data, absolutely, learning is critical. Career development is critical. The number of sales leaders and enablement teams and L&D teams that are dictating all the topics that people are getting trained on, that needs to stop. Because again, we think about the audience. I actually prefer to go to my audience once a month and say, we will do one training session this month on any topic you want, anyone you want at all. And it's interesting because, Nora, if this ties into what you said, the last time I asked that question, what they all wanted by popular vote was they wanted to know how to start building themselves on LinkedIn. Of all the things, we do so much of our training based on data for the sales motion, but the majority of my younger sellers said, I want to know how to use LinkedIn better. I have Sales Nav, I know how to do my filters and my spotlights, and I know how to use the tools, but how do I have a voice? How do I engage? How do I send a DM that actually means something in LinkedIn? Another one, and this hits on what you said too, was video editing. They're like, I do Vidyards or I use Looms or I use whatever, but I want to try to step up my game a little bit. Can we do a 30-minute session this month on how I can get stronger, better, faster with video? Now, that's obviously a balance because we need to focus on what the business drivers are with training. But I would say when we think about a culture of continuous learning and getting our sellers bought in, it's about what matters to them. And as much as they want to close those deals and get those commissions checks, the days of everybody wearing a navy blue suit and a white shirt are gone. And how each person gets there is going to be different. And so creating a culture and an environment that embraces, bring your voice to the table for what training should be happening this quarter as well, I think really helps to support continuous learning, especially with the under 40 generations.
That's great. You're defining a multi-layered enablement function. And learning can both be just in time and learning can also be on demand. We've seen some research lately that shows that high-performing sales organizations are much more likely than low, regardless of size, to have an enablement help desk. The size and scope of the organization can determine whether it's just a we promise to get back to you within 24 hours, enablement@acme.com email address, all the way up to a 24/7 around the globe, literal staffed help desk. In any way, shape, and form, whether it's, mama bear, papa bear, or baby bear, quality or quantity of ability. I need help. Can you help me right now? Wow. And if somebody is asking that question, they basically are signaling that you are, you're in a great place with these people because they see you as a source of help and not a source of being a, pain in the what. And so I think that the idea of asking, what would you like to learn about? Especially if you can, determine what your high performers, medium, and low performers are asking for, also allows you to provide the remedial help versus the opportunistic help to folks.
And it's that balance. I love that. Okay. So let's assume we've got the right tools and/or teams supporting our sellers in 2024. And let's assume that we are doing this great job as a leadership team and across the organization of creating a culture of learning and continuous learning. How are we actually going to hold folks accountable to their learning and measure the impact of it? Peter, I'd love to come to you first on this one, since you're our data analyst expert on this call.
So how do we hold individual contributors on our sales organization accountable for completing the learning, for putting it into action? Or how are we holding ourselves as enablers accountable for effectively delivering it?
So I would actually focus this one on our audience. So it could be our ICs or the sales leaders.
Mandatory learning should be left to the folks in HR. And we want to draw a very, very firm, build a very big wall in between what we are providing to help people hit their number and forcing folks to learn something. Now, that being said, yes, you need to have certain levels of compliance if you're selling to highly regulated industries. Yes, you should probably not be placed in certain buyer-seller interactions if you have not properly certified, because we need to protect us, you, and the customer. But when it comes to ongoing skills development that aren't necessarily related to a specific motion, I think that mandating the learning is generally going to be a tactic that could create some controversy, lack of engagement, and contribute negatively to the culture of the organization. That being said, and I think we go right back to something Norf said much earlier about finding evangelists within your IC population, the best thing we can do is to try to stack the deck and to, when we believe strongly that any kind of learning path or artifact or competency attainment is really going to be a good thing for folks, is let's make sure that the folks who have the right type of voices have early access to that. They become the pilot group and, use the power of that internal evangelism rather than us as a stick to try to drive that forward. I guess I'm sensitive to this, right? The 32 to 36 courses piece. We get a lot of customers coming to us saying, hey, the sales team won't do what I want them to do. Could you help me make them like, whoa, the moment you ask me to help you make them do anything, my dander's getting up at that point, because you work for them, you serve them. And if you feel like you have to enforce or adopt, I kind of feel like maybe a step back and looking at our mission statement for what are we as a servant organization probably needs to be revisited. That being said, there are certain very good arguments for insisting that folks have certain learning artifacts in place. We're seeing more organizations that are saying, 97% of our new hires graduate from onboarding. What do you mean? 3% are going to flunk out. You're just going to fire them? No, we'll find ways to redirect. But assuming that 100% of your new hires are going to get through onboarding is actually a worse practice. So we actually see that. We see validation of more of formal assessments and certifications. But this is probably part of a bigger movement that we're not going to solve today, but be interesting to talk about in the future broadcast, which is, to what extent can we identify selling as a professional endeavor? We license, certify, and assess regularly our teachers, our plumbers, our electricians, our doctors, our attorneys, but we don't usually do it for sellers. Here's a script, go out and sell. Come back if you make your number. And there's such a disparity between those extremes that I think all of us who are participating in and listening to this event probably have something to gain by elevating the profession, as we always say, of sales, because there are specific skills that are common to all of these roles. There are reasonable certifications and assessments and validations that we are good enough to do a certain job in front of that all important customer. So in conclusion, train a lot, make people want it.
Steve, you want to follow that up after we've made them want it?
Yeah, I'll take this one, Peter. I think you and I actually look at this fairly differently. I fully respect the intention of we want this to be, one, we've got to be servants, 100% aligned with that. Two, you want people to want this as much as possible, and I agree with both of those. I think the place that we first have to be aligned is with sales leadership. Are we providing what sales leadership wants their folks to learn, and are we doing it with great quality? And I think one of the symptoms I'm imagining of some of what you've described and I've run into that too. Oh man, we can't get people to take this stuff. Is the quality good? Are you meeting a true need that sales leadership agrees is a need that you've tested with some frontline salespeople and they say, yeah, this is really high quality stuff and this is going to help me? That's the table stakes that has to be there. I'd be curious though, I don't know, in your experience, have you seen a fully opt-in program that gets more than 20 or 30% of people to participate on a regular basis?
Yeah, I mean, I'll split the difference there. I mean, the numbers are less important, and the idea of fully opt-in or not fully opt-in is one thing. I think we do need to make certain types of learning and development mandatory, as long as we're comfortable that it's effective and that it's delivered when and how it's going to be effective, which requires disciplines that we've already chatted about. I think that's occupational learning. What do I need to be good at to do my job now? The inspirational and aspirational, what do I need to do really well at and learn to be good for the next job? And then just to be a better professional. That's where I think we're talking about more options. I think what I tend to do, Steve, is, and you've heard me say this before, is I tend to rebel against organizations who just, unfortunately, just have this production hubris of saying, every course we produce has got to be great because we're the ones who produced it. And I'm just looking for some more humility in our industry, for folks to understand that, if you're a Major League Baseball player and you only fail 2/3 of the time, you're in Cooperstown. So failure is great. It's an opportunity to learn. So we all know that there are technologies out there that allow us to know to what extent our buyer-facing content is or isn't associated with deals that win and deals that close. Let's make sure that our internal customer-facing content, our readiness, learning, development, and training artifacts are also subject to the same rigor, and make sure that the reason I tend to rebel against forced learning is because what we're asking folks to learn isn't as vetted as well as the way you just described. If we know it's good, if we know they like it, if we know that they put it into play, then it's a lot more easy to be confident saying, okay, this is something that really works. We need everybody to participate in it.
I think that it makes a lot of sense. And I think I agree that there's sort of two buckets of there's the aspirational, broader career development, help you get to the next level. Yeah, let's very much make that opt-in and available. I find a lot of organizations just don't have the bandwidth to get to that as much as we probably all wish they could, and for better or worse, that the more optional pieces, that people just don't have the time to build it. But for the daily sort of ongoing key to the business, critical top of mind initiative type learning, whether it is new product release or up-leveling sales skills, on any end of that spectrum, I find that you've got to have that agreement with leadership. Yes, this is important. And the contract I always had when I was in the enablement chair is sales leadership. You hold me accountable to building learning that everybody says this is great. And if it's not great, tell me. And it's my job to make it great. And I need your job is to make sure your people go do it. And that it does take some accountability to, frankly, it's not that people don't want to do it. It's that everybody's busy. And we got to have, the number of times that I've had something assigned to me that I had all the right intention of doing, and it just wasn't the most urgent thing on my to-do list. And so I do think that we've got to help people get over that. I was talking to a sales leader 2 days ago who said, look, and he was a guy that was actually just recently promoted from being a frontline seller into a management role, overseeing a new line of business for this company. He's like, we just have not had the discipline for our team to learn the things they need to learn. We haven't had the focus. We haven't had the accountability. Can you bring that to us? That's what my team needs to be able to do this. And it's not that people are slacking. It's not they didn't want to do it. It's just create the focus to do the things that we all say matter. And so there is, I think, a fine line there. This can't be, I'm going to force feed you your vegetables, and make you like it. That's no good. And at the same time, I think all of us need a little accountability in our lives to do the things that we need to do. And that's just life. And so I think having the ability to measure and track, but it should be leadership that drives that accountability. Enablement provides the tools so that leadership knows who on their team has done the things and hasn't done the things. It's up to leadership to actually carry the stick as needed. And enablement's got to deliver the goods in terms of quality.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with everything that you have said, Steve. To the point where we've tried to change a lot of the subculture within our enablement team, which is, we're the team that provides the vehicle, if you will, we're the team that provides the vehicle. It's our sales leaders that help us define and create what the payload looks like. And they have to be responsible for that payload as well as us being responsible for the vehicle that the payload gets delivered on. But I want to come back to something that Peter said, which I thought was really interesting. There's a piece of, we've got to create the fundamental content for people to be able to do their job. But then also there's the inspirational and aspirational aspects as well. And for me, I define that as adjacencies, right? Because when we're enabling our salespeople, I find that a number of individuals that I've certainly spoken to on a personal level will just focus on, we've got to make sure that our sellers close deals. We've got to make sure that their win rates get high. We've got to make sure that their attainment rate is super high as well. And they tend to focus on the work side of our sellers. But our sellers are people. So how do we focus on the entirety of the person, right? The person holistically. And it comes back to one of the points that, in fact, both of you were making with regard to, there are some foundational things that we've got to make sure that our sellers do understand, and we observe those behaviors. Either we observe them by eye or we observe them through KPIs and metrics. Fine. But to the point that you were both making, what about the adjacencies? What about kind of, Gen Z sellers that want to learn a little bit more about video editing? Well, okay, we can give them the tools to do that, but why do they want to do it? I see that they want to do it because they want to drive more relevance in their day job. So give them those adjacencies, give them the opportunities to learn things in those adjacencies, because you'll find that if those adjacencies are skills that they can pick up quite quickly, bite-sized content, for example, in shorts or Instagram reels or whatever, put that content in those adjacencies, because their day job is then going to improve much more. Some of you may have heard me say that I believe that skills are the currency for the work of tomorrow. So the more skills that we put in those adjacencies, I think we'll find that our sellers will start to leverage those skills in ways that we probably hadn't thought about.
And that was so beautifully said. And yeah, Paul, it goes back to, I'd asked the question about, well, why do you want to learn about LinkedIn? And, there's 4 buckets of different kinds of LinkedIn personas, if you will, creators and community builders and connectors and the like. The root of it was, they want a bigger network of potential prospects to engage with and pull from. Let's invest a couple of hours of our time to do a course, to review their profiles, to help them write content the first couple of times to build that confidence. Because guess what? We might not have an ROI next month or next quarter for that, but we will see that complementary skill start to actually impact the dollar value of our deals and the bottom line in the months to come. And those complementary skills, I think, are both going to drive our learning culture, drive our employee experience, our into retention, all that jazz, and help create great enablement buy-in across the board. So I love that. The one piece I'd add as we're talking about all of this measurement and reinforcement, I love coaching kits for managers at the end of a program. So here's the training we did. It could be a 1-pager. It could be a live 5-minute session. It doesn't really matter. It depends on the program. Here's what you need to do as the manager. And by the way, here's my commitment as part of this management coaching kit. So for the next month in your one-on-ones, here are the 3 questions that you need to ask your team to reinforce this behavior. And my commitment to you is I'm going to score at least 5 of every single one of your reps calls with this new scorecard in our conversation tool. That kind of a clarity and reinforcement really helps tie in, are they modeling the behaviors we talked about, and use that as a leading indicator to, is that impacting our revenue? So I love that.
I love that.
You guys just tied that up with a big, beautiful bow with all your points there. It's perfect. It was perfect. Sorry, Steve, were you trying to jump in there at the end?
Reinforcing, I love that. I love that point. I've seen that. I've seen a number of companies do that really, really well, and I think it makes a huge difference.
Amazing. Amazing. Okay. So we are at the end of our structured 3 questions, which means this is our quick hit key takeaway round the horn for everybody to wrap up for our audience. It's been a great 45 minute conversation for each of you. What was a key takeaway you had from this conversation that you think folks should bring them with them as well? Peter, let's start with you first.
Servant function. That's what we always need to remember. We are in enablement. It may not always feel like we're at the big grown-ups table making the biggest of decisions, but there are ways to impact those decisions more effectively by having better skills around communicating with those folks who are there. Ultimately, they realize that if we are customer obsessed internally, it'll help them be customer obsessed externally.
Oh, beautifully well said. Steve, over to you next.
It's interesting. I mean, I think skill development is hard. I think if one thing came clear out of all this discussion is there's a lot we got to get right to get people to truly develop. And yet, if we have the focus, as Peter said, on what is it that our sellers truly need, we deliver with quality. We don't skip steps. We've had those examples. We know what great looks like. We provide the practice. We provide the coaching. We provide the inspiration about holding the bar high. It's amazing the magic that can happen. And it's just about, let's really see this process through and do it with the right intention all the way.
I love it. Paul?
For me, it's got to be about enablement, investing into them, right? So to Peter's point earlier, you've got to start with your change of mindset as a person, right? What am I going to learn today? And then you start to kind of push that out to the enablement team as well, and you create that culture of learning, or you increase that culture of learning in the team. In our organization, in my enablement organization, we are firm believers that skills are the currency for the work of tomorrow. So we're constantly focusing on how do we better our skills, and then how do we share that with the wider team. And we have a mantra in our team, which was, as we continue to invest in our skills, we often say that we've upped our game in order for our sellers to up theirs. And it's funny that the sellers in our organization always kind of stop and think, hang on, enablement, you're investing in your skills, and you're investing in what you do to help me up mine. Yes, and they often walk away kind of chuckling about it, because they absolutely get the message. So investing in ourselves to stay sharp, that then keeps us relevant to then invest in our sales organization, who, in my mind, are our greatest resource.
You guys are making my job easy. I would say the one thing that's resonating for me listening to all 3 of you speak, and some of us have had conversations before, there's no one right way. There's 42 different types of enablement. Every company, every team is a little bit different. But the fundamental thing is, it is never enablement versus sales. It is always enablement and sales. And so with every program, with every approach, with every metric, focusing on our learners, our audience, and communicating that what's in it for them every time, that will help drive our programs to be as successful as possible. So I would like to thank all 3 of you for being on today and sharing with us, obviously, so much more expertise than we could cover in just this period of time. I would recommend to everybody in the audience to follow you on LinkedIn, to connect with you. I know you're sharing regularly the great insights that you have. The beauty of enablement communities is we are a group of people who fundamentally want to help others. So thank you all for what you shared today. Thank you for what you share regularly. Thank you to everybody at home and in offices for joining us on this Mega SKO session. Wish you all a fantastic day.